joined by our baking extraordinaire, Matty Edgell, who won Great British Bake Off last year.
Woo!
Welcome. Congratulations as well. I'm sure you're sick of being congratulated.
And there's Matty Minder.
No, you like all the glory.
Yeah.
What was it like winning the Great British Bake Off? What's last year been like for you?
Winning it was I was not expecting to win. At any point until they said my name.
You're a very
it was a
humble
nice
guy.
surprise. No, I was just
really?
in touch with reality. Yeah, no, I wasn't.
Was it quite a close race throughout then?
Yeah, I considered myself the underdog throughout. I think the first week I turned around after the showstopper and kind of saw how good everyone was, and then looked at mine and thought, how have I got here? And that kind of theme followed through.
But then that's really like an underdog.
Yeah, it did.
Actually, I'm going to get better throughout this.
Yeah, I think it made me kind of like really tune into the feedback that they was giving me and trying to embed that throughout. So that's probably why.
Could you feel yourself improving as the series went on?
Definitely, and I think also, like, kind of simultaneously, my confidence improved at the same time, and then that, like, little bit of belief in myself probably helped out as well.
What was your strength? Biscuits, cake, bread?
I think cake's my strength.
Cake.
I think cake, typically, if you start baking, that's probably where you start, isn't it? So that was what I knew most.
How did you start baking?
I've been asked this so many times since...
You don't know?
I attribute it to my nan.
Oh,
sweet. But, yeah, I would say, I think most people probably attribute it to, like, a grandparent or something that they maybe done with, like, their parents when they was growing up. So that's... I'll give it to my nan.
Or the major lockdown baking boom.
Yeah, banana bread.
Everybody...
All over the place, isn't it? It's good.
Yeah, it's really good. I love a banana bread, even now.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Happy New Year to you. We might only be 5 days into 2020-25, but there's been plenty of politics to get stuck into already. The Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Wes Streeting, is going to be on the show. I'm going to be asking him about his promise to cut waiting lists from a maximum of 18 months to 18 weeks by the end of the Parliament. Is he going to be able to do it? Will he have to resign if he doesn't? I'm also going to be asking him why the government is resisting calls for a full national inquiry into the child rape gangs. I'll also be asking Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp whether it was sensible for Kemi Badenoch to accuse Reform UK of lying about their membership figures. The Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, will be live on the programme. Does he know exactly what role Nigel Farage will have in tariff talks between the UK and the US? Will he be the conduit between Peter Mandelson and Donald Trump? Heaven forbid. And the Managing Director of the Public Safety Foundation, Oliver Lawrence, will join me on the show to offer a policing perspective on the child rape gang scandal that has been developing this week. And I'm also going to be hearing from the pollster Scarlett Maguire and former Labour Minister Bill Rammell. We're going to discuss what might be coming ahead for all of the parties, and I include Reform in that, who are rising through the ranks. There's a poll that we're going to be speaking about in the pay-per view in just a moment, and just ask them what is really going to be the thing that we need to look out for in 2025. So, again, 90 minutes of punchy British politics to come. Do not think of going anywhere. Let's get stuck into the Sunday front pages now with former BBC broadcaster Nicholas Owen. Nicholas, Happy New Year to you, chap.
To you.
Lovely to see you.
Yeah.
Right, let's get stuck into this Mail on Sunday poll. I love a poll.
Yeah.
I love a New Year poll. This is a State of the Nation poll. They've headlined it, poll, : Starmer will be out of number 10 in a year. Now, to be fair, Nick, you did remind me this morning that you suggested this a few months ago.
Well, yes. I did say that his chances of surviving through to the end of the parliamentary term were a bit thin, but it seems that the Mail have gone out to ask the general public, and they've said, oh, gosh, he won't last 5. I'm not quite sure how short a term they think he's going to have.
No, so they've said, how long do you expect Keir Starmer to remain PM? 1 year or less, 31%. 2 years, 15%. 3 years, 9%.
Yeah.
The other interesting aspect of this survey is, who do you think will be the next Prime Minister? Nigel Farage, 20%. Kemi Badenoch, 10%. Angela Rayner, 7%. Boris Johnson, 5%. Rachel Reeves, 4%. Keir Starmer doesn't even feature.
Yes, I know.
So is it one-term Keir?
Yeah. Well, as I did express my scepticism about it, but over the whole term, I don't think it's going to happen as quickly as that, and, or if it happens at all. But it is fascinating, this. There's not much comfort for anybody apart from Farage in this, is there? I mean, some of these figures are pretty dreadful.
Yeah, Keir Starmer, is he doing well at his job? Yeah. There's a net disapproval rating of -42.
Yeah. Kemi Badenoch, net figure of -21.
Yeah.
Not very clever, is it? Not very clever at all.
Who would you like to go to the pub with, the public are asked? Boris Johnson tops that poll, shortly followed by Nigel Farage. Again, Badenoch hasn't connected with the public. She's down at the bottom of that poll. More people would rather go for a beer with Keir Starmer than Kemi Badenoch, which is not a great, endorsement of the Tory leader.
No, absolutely fascinating. I think the trouble with Kemi Badenoch is that there's quite a bit of respect for her as a sort of tough person, but he's just the sort of person that you wouldn't get a word in edgeways if you were in the pub with them. But I must tell people this, that I've had quite a lot of it over the years, meeting up with Boris Johnson, not normally in pubs, normally in sort of cafes in the morning when we're coffee time, I was working around the corner from him, and he would come in to the Greasy Spoon, and we'd both be ordering our coffee, and he would always at me, I never got a chance to almost say anything at all, and he'd still be talking with hair flowing as he left the bar. So don't think of going to the pub with him. Nigel Farage, that would be more interesting. I think.
As long as you weren't having to buy all of the drinks. By his own admission, he does like to put it away. Yeah. Let's move on to the Sunday Telegraph.
Oh, yes.
It's been interesting, Nick, hasn't it, how the grooming scandal has resurfaced, because Kemi Badenoch has basically admitted that the Conservatives didn't do enough and is now pushing Labour for this national inquiry. Labour are resisting the idea of a national inquiry, and we'll get on to why in a moment. But then we have this revelation in the Telegraph that when he was opposition leader, and let's not forget, because he does like to mention it, he was former director of public prosecutions, Keir Starmer.
Yes, apparently he was. Yes, that's true.
A toolmaker's son. I don't know if you caught that. But equally, he was asked by this lady who was involved in the whistleblowing. What's her name, Nick? She's down in that copy.
Yes,
Jane Senior.
Jane Senior.
She was the whistleblower who exposed the Rotherham abuse.
Yes.
She lobbied Keir Starmer for a meeting, which you would think that he'd want to take. I mean, this woman has been instrumental in revealing child rapists in Rochdale society, and he snubs her.
Yes, I must say, it's one of the situations, isn't it, where whichever government's been in power, this thing has been coming along. There has been one big inquiry. There was a national inquiry by this lady, Professor Alexis Jay, while the Tories were in power. Big inquiry going back some years, yes, but looking into child grooming and terrible rape and all these sorts of things. 20 major recommendations made by that inquiry.
Yeah.
Not one of them was implemented by the last government. So, there's mud flying around in all directions here.
I agree with you, and I think that the Conservatives are on shaky ground because they didn't do enough about this while they were in office. Having said that, the concern about that previous Jay inquiry is it only covered 2010 to 2014.
Yeah.
There's a massive read about this in the Telegraph yesterday suggesting this goes back to the 1980s. Of course, there are massive questions to be asked. Were the police and other authorities and social workers and other institutions mining their political political correct P's and Q's at the expense of vulnerable teenage girls living in impoverished communities in the north.
Indeed, Camilla, and also one should just look at the way this works in national political terms as well, when particularly some Labour MPs are only in their constituencies by very small margins.
Yes.
There's a very big vote from people, let us say, with other interests, and they've got their eye on that.
Jess Phillips says Birmingham Yardley, because she's been criticised particularly by Elon Musk. You know, she's done a lot for women and girls and safeguarding and been an anti-rape campaigner, and yet she's resisting this public inquiry. She thinks it's just OK for Oldham to investigate Oldham, questions being asked of that. Her Birmingham Yardley seat is 45% Muslim. Is there a reluctance by some of these Labour MPs to mention the fact that these grooming gangs are led by predominantly Pakistani men? Is this going to alienate the Muslim vote for Labour?
This is a very, very difficult situation. And as we keep saying, Camilla, I must say this, every government has had this issue to face.
Yes.
And all of them find it an extremely difficult thing to get a handle on.
Well, I'll be asking both Wes Streeting and the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, about it on the show a little later. Let's move on to the Sunday Times, page 1.
Yes.
Revealed. Minister lived in home gifted by ally of despot's aunt's regime. This is about Tulip Siddiq.
Tulip Siddiq, yes, who is in charge of, I think it's National Security Minister or something of that sort, isn't she? I think
she's basically like the anti-corruption minister.
Anti-corruption minister, that's right, yes.
Which is problematic.
Yeah. It is, because her connections, unfortunately, go back, and her family come from Bangladesh, which is an extremely tangled place in terms of politics and corruption and everything else. Some of her relatives are being kicked out of Bangladesh, and now it is said that she is living in a flat handed to her by her teenage sister, the sister of the nieces of Sheikh Hasina. She was the woman who was the Prime Minister of Bangladesh until she was kicked out and now living in India, sort of in exile because of corruption. This is a tangled tale.
Isn't it? But
they're
also,
really tangled
my
tale.
impression is from the coverage in both the Sunday Times and the Mail on Sunday is there's been some confusion, let's put it that way, Nick, about who owns these properties that Tulip Siddiq and her sisters live in.
Yes.
And actually the deposed Bangladeshi leader has been linked to some extremely nefarious behaviour.
Absolutely.
Including, it's been suggested, you know, there's been an allegation that she's been linked to actual state-sponsored murder.
Yes,
so the idea that we then have a Labour MP and a minister at the heart of it without answering any questions. The Mail on Sunday says that, you know, she has misled a national newspaper about where she was living and who owned the properties. It's a bit of a mess.
It is a mess.
I would imagine if the shoe was on the other foot and this was a Conservative minister and Labour were in opposition, they may be calling for heads to roll.
Yes, I would have thought so. Yes, I would have thought so. But a very tricky situation.
Now,
denials all around the wicket.
Sticking with the Mail on Sunday, which has had a strong output this morning, it's
yes.
suggesting on page 4 that Labour is plotting to rig the next election by axing the voter ID scheme. Talk us through that, Nick.
Well, this is interesting, isn't it? I mean, for many, many years, going back centuries, we all went to the polls, those who when they could vote. Women eventually in the 1920s, far too late, of course. But you just walked in and, you know, you gave your vote and that was fine. Then gradually the idea has come along that you have to have some sort of ID. Tony Blair, particularly when Prime Minister, very keen on an ID scheme. You do have to show I think you do have to prove your identity now, but to have an actual national ID scheme is always thought to be a good idea. Suddenly it said Labour don't want this now, and part of the argument being that this puts off younger voters, bearing in mind Labour wants to reduce the voting age anyway down to 16 and 17.
I don't understand this, though, because younger voters, of all voters, are used to having to carry ID because they have to show it in pubs and things when they're 18 to prove that they can drink. Yeah. You know, at 17, a lot of youngsters get a driving licence. The main concern about not showing voter ID, of course, is that voters end up voting in two different places. We've seen it a lot with students, that they vote on campus and then they go home and vote. Yes. That then, therefore, means a double vote for Labour and perhaps the Lib Dems because students predominantly support the left and not the right.
Yes.
And that's problematic.
Yes.
Add into that votes for 16 or 17-year-olds. However, we talked about him earlier. The person rubbing his hands together with glee at the idea now of 16 and 17-year-olds voting, of course, is Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage,
because he's got this huge following. I mean,
Yeah.
do we think that we're actually... It used to be the case that kind of a small C Conservative and being young was an oxymoron. Are we now seeing more younger people turning to the right?
Well, it would seem so, wouldn't it? Particularly when you've got someone like Elon Musk so active on his own platform X, and everybody knows his name and everything else. It's becoming a sort of trendy figure. And young people tend to follow that, don't they, whoever it is?
Yes.
And I think there's been a big seismic shift, and I think politics certainly is moving. When you look at what's happening, particularly in the rest of Europe, we are the only country now that has a sort of left-wing government. It looks like we're going to be left sort of on our own. Outlier is the common word for it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's bound to affect. I can't imagine that young people in this country are somehow going to be apart from what's happening in so many other places, frankly.
Also, on Elon Musk, as you mentioned him, because I'm going to be mentioning him to Richard Tice a little later, because he has made some pretty outlandish claims about the child rape scandal, saying that Keir Starmer is complicit in the crimes and suggesting that Jess Phillips should be locked up for failing to call for this public inquiry. What's your analysis as a seasoned newsman, Nick, of Elon Musk and his contributions?
Well, I find it quite extraordinary. I'm trying to get my head round the idea. Why is Musk so consumed with interest about our country in particular? I can't really understand why.
I mean, he's a self-confessed Anglophile, isn't he?
Well,
and he's spent a lot of time here, and he's got British family and British links. Apart from he's South African, but he's got strong British links. Does he sort of go on X and interfere in other nations' concerns?
Well,
he's been quite critical of Canada, hasn't he?
He's been very, very critical of Canada, particularly of Trudeau, of course, following very much in the Donald Trump, of course, has been absolutely terribly rude about Canada, talking about Trudeau being the governor of the 52nd state or whatever it is.
Right.
I mean,
Yes,
you don't get much more insulting than that. So Musk probably taking his cue for that. But somebody was telling me earlier on here, we've got colleagues here, that he's actually being rude about other countries as well. Australia, for example. Anywhere where there's English is spoken,
he feels that he can have a say.
He can have a say.
And do we think, finally, that he's a help or hindrance to reform?
I think he may be a hindrance in that you never know what he's going to be saying next to you. As Farage was saying, free speech is fine, free speech is fine. But be very careful what free speech might actually get said in the course of that. Won't help you in the long run, I don't think.
His money might be handy, though, Nick. You never know. Nicholas Owen, thank you very much indeed for joining me on GB News this morning. Coming up next, as I said, I'm going to be speaking to the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, about his promise to cut waiting lists from a maximum of 18 months to just 18 weeks by the end of the Parliament. How's he going to do it? Stick with me. We'll be back in just a moment with that interview.
I hope it doesn't rain.
Don't worry about it.
It'll spoil our holiday.
Relax, we're totally covered.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there. It continues to remain unsettled across western parts of the Mediterranean, but fairly warm for the time of year, drier further east. Dry for Madeira though, temperatures 18 Celsius on Monday, but you can see unsettled weather across Portugal, Spain, southern France into Italy. Temperatures on the cool side, but drier towards Greece and Cyprus and Turkey as well. But temperatures here nearer to average for the time of year, but some pleasant sunny spells. Staying warm in Madeira for the next few days as well.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Thank you, Britain.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for subscribing.
Thank you for your support.
It's you that make us the People's Channel.
As we reflect on our journey so far, we're filled with immense gratitude.
You mean the world to us. We couldn't have reached this point without you.
As a very special thank you, we are giving you the chance to win one of 50 GB News thank you boxes. They're worth £50 each.
For full terms and conditions, and to enter, just go to gbnews.com/thank you.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
It's about Generation Z spending 6 hours a day online. Generation Z, which age group is that?
That's 16 to 24.
OK, great.
Now, this could explain why there's 1 million young people aged between 16 and 24
not working.
work.
Yeah.
And I did a TV show and we're talking about it, and the lefty person I was on with was making excuses for the fact that we've got 9 million people unemployed. And this woman, this mom, rang in and she was hilarious. And I thought she was going to have a go at me. She said, Cara Malone, I thought, here we go, another one. And she goes, you are absolutely right. She said, I've just thrown my son out of the house, who's 24. She said, my husband and I, she said, we worked all our lives, 2 jobs, to get him to college, to get him to a private school.
Yeah.
She said he hasn't worked a day.
No.
And his attitude was, why should I? And you think... And she said he spends all day online.
On his phone.
That's all he's
Because
doing.
we would have gone to get a job because we were bored. And the trouble is, Jonathan, the younger generation are never, ever bored because the algorithms keep them stimulated.
Well, the dopamine hits keep coming. I think it's actually a problem for all of us. Yeah. You know, now for anyone, if you just have a moment to yourself, a lot of people of all ages, what do we reach for? We reach for our phones, particularly for those. Obviously, if we're with a friend, we'll talk to them.
Your age group, you're not talking about...
Well, I know that. I've spoken to a lot of people who are in their 50s and 60s who also will just, you know, if they have a free on the tube or whatever, they'll just look at their phone and read. And it's actually terrifying because on the iPhone every Monday it tells you how much time you spent on your phone the previous week, and it's...
How much for you?
On average per day?
Fair few hours. I mean, a lot of that will be work.
What's a ballpark? Oh, more than 5?
Occasionally 5. Yeah.
Well,
better things to do.
Spending 6 hours a day.
Do you never read a book? Well, that'll be at night time.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. We're going to be joined by the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, in just a moment. He's just being mic'd up, to use a technical term. Nicholas Owen, veteran broadcaster, still is with me in the studio. Nick, let's just go through exactly what Labour are announcing with regard to this NHS app revolution. I do look at the words NHS app and inwardly...
Yes, shrink, don't you?
Yeah, because you worry that it's just going to be a lot of money spent on technology that isn't going to deliver. But this is the 4-point plan. The NHS app upgrades will allow patients to, 1, view and manage appointments at a time and place that is convenient to them, reducing missed appointments. Well, that would be useful if it can. 2, choose from a wide range of providers, including in the independent sector. I'm sure there are some lefties not happy about that. The privatisation of the NHS, they will complain. 3, book diagnostic tests at convenient locations such as community diagnostic centres, CDCs, in a local shopping centre. And 4, receive test results quickly through the app before choosing the next step, whether that's a remote consultation or surgery at a convenient time and location.
I've great scepticism whether any of this will work, but also the other thing I would say, my generation, I think, are very much entitled to worry about it. So many people are not very good at any of this stuff.
No.
Not sure I am, frankly.
No.
And am I going to be blocked out? It's all going to be people of your generation who are wonderfully quick on this, going to leap in ahead of me and in the queue for the local private hospital,
Sure.
apparently? No, I
Also concerns about the use of people's data when it comes to app. You know, is the data being stored safely? Is it being stored ethically?
Yeah.
Is it going to be sold to the highest pharmaceutical bidder when the time comes? I mean, it's all quite concerning.
Very, very good. Well, I hope you'll give Mr. Streeting... I mean, please do ask him that very question about... There's so many people who I think are disenfranchised, I think would be the word.
Yes.
You've got to be really skillful at using some of these apps, it seems to me, and an enormous number. Exactly. The National Health Service, I had to take my wife into hospital over the New Year period, just before the New Year period. She got the flu. The local hospital was the only place that could cope and did very, very well. The East Surrey Hospital, I paid great tribute to the work that they did there, you know. But the fact is, the old-fashioned way of going to a hospital or going to your doctor, that's what we still need to do. We've got to take our physical bodies. We can't do everything over an app and through a machine all the time. I think that just seems completely impractical to me. But, I mean, do ask him, please.
I will do.
People
Well,
like
I'm
me.
hoping Mr. Streeting, I'm going to just try and listen in my ear to see if Mr. Streeting is ready. We're still waiting on Mr. Streeting. What do we make of him as a politician? I jokingly describe him as the most ambitious man in the Labour Party. He might be the most ambitious man in the country, actually. He has got his eyes on the ultimate prize, hasn't he?
Yes, but he's also sitting on top of the biggest poison chalice the world has ever known, called the National Health Service.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's got to deliver, hasn't he? And he said he was going to do this and he was going to do that. We have the National Care Plan is now going to be talked about up to 2028.
I think that's unbelievable. Why would you be kicking national social care and a plan into the curb and then having a review? We've already got Dilnot. I shall ask him this. We've already got the Dilnot recommendations. We've had them for years, right? He's here. He's here apparently, Nick. Wes Streeting, hopefully you can hear me, Health Secretary. Lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much again for coming on the Camilla Tominey Show.
Unfortunately, I heard quite a lot of that. Good morning.
Did you? Well, I just said that you're the most ambitious man in the Labour Party, if not the country, and I don't think you're going to disabuse me of that notion. But let's very swiftly move on to your announcement about your NHS app. Now, this target, you're going to reduce the 18-month wait to an 18-week wait by the end of Parliament. Is that right? That's quite ambitious. Will you stand down from your post if you do not achieve that target?
Well, I don't think the Prime Minister will keep me in my job if I'm not delivering for patients. That's what he expects me to do, because we've got what is objectively the worst crisis in the NHS's history today and waiting times that are far too high. That's why the Prime Minister and I tomorrow are setting out the actions we are taking to get those waiting times down. And yes, that's about the investment the Chancellor announced in the budget, but it is also about the reform that's needed. We've got to modernise the NHS, giving patients more choice, more power, more control, more ease, more convenience over booking their appointments, choice about where to be treated. We'll do that through the NHS app, frankly, bringing the NHS in line with most other service providers in this country. But we're also going to tackle some of the waste and inefficiency we see in the NHS, whether that's actually sending reminders for people to turn up to their appointments in the way that a lot of restaurants do or hairdressers do, so that appointments don't get missed. We're going to make sure that we get rid of unnecessary outpatients appointments that take up time and valuable clinician time that could be freed up. So a number of really practical things that will help get those waiting times down by the end of the Parliament.
But nothing, no decision or action on social care until 2028. So you've commissioned this review. Why do you need a review? We've been discussing social care for about 5 decades. We've got the Dilnot recommendations. Why on earth do you need another review? Just take some action on this issue. That's what you promised in opposition.
Well, we are taking action. So in the last 6 months,
no, you're not. You're having a review.
We legislated within the first... Hang on, you've got to listen to the answer. In the first 6 months, we legislated for the first ever fair pay agreements so that we can tackle the workforce crisis. We've delivered the biggest expansion of carers allowance since the 1970s. Just this week, I announced £86 million extra in the disabled facilities grant right now. So between January and April, we should see almost 8,000 home adaptations to give disabled people the independence, freedom and dignity they need to lead their homes lives. And yes,
do we have a social care plan?
Why do we? Well, I've just listed a whole load of practical actions.
Do we have a social care plan,
and then as for
Minister?
Yes, and as for the Casey Commission, it is precisely because of that. And you're right, decade after decade of failure on social care that we are choosing to do things differently, asking one of the best-known social reformers in our country, a doer, not a talker, to knock heads together to build the party political consensus I think we need on this issue. And you won't have to wait a few years for her to report. Next year, she'll be setting out the actions we need to take during this Parliament over the coming years on social care. So we'll be getting on with the job this Parliament. But I think it is a good thing, by the way, I genuinely do, to try and make sure that in terms of the long-term plan, we try and bring political parties together, stop social care being a political football, and stop the race to the bottom that we've seen. You know, if you want to, I mean, look at what happened to Andy Burnham and Gordon Brown in 2010 when their ideas were torpedoed by the Tories, and David Cameron later said he regretted it. Look at Theresa May. You know, her plans were torpedoed by us. So we've got to break this cycle of broken politics, and that's what we're trying to do. Because
we'll get a result in 2028.
Lib Dem, SNP governments, we've all failed, and we've got to work together to put it right. And I think if we do that, that will be a big achievement.
I tell you what's been another successive government failure, and that's cracking down. I'm not going to call them grooming gangs. I'm going to call them child rape gangs. Why? I can't understand this. Why is Labour, of all parties, we're talking about thousands of girls from vulnerable communities in the north being raped repeatedly, often gang raped by largely Pakistani men. Why on Wouldn't you have a public inquiry into this? And I know you're going to say, oh, there was an inquiry by Alexis J and that made 20 recommendations. But the scope of that inquiry was really narrow. All of the campaigners and the whistleblowers in this, Maggie Oliver, Jane Senior and others, have said you need a public inquiry because this problem is still ongoing. There's been a 10% increase in cases in the last year alone. Why are you resisting a public inquiry?
Well, firstly, we've got to get on with delivering change now. So it is right to say there were 20 recommendations in the previous inquiry. None of those were implemented by the last government. We are going to get on with that. Secondly, you talk about the fact that many of the perpetrators of these rapes and these grooming gangs in towns in the north of England were Pakistani men. The Casey review in Rotherham already identified the fact that it was too often fear of racism, being accused of racism, I should say, or fear of being accused of upsetting community cohesion that saw inaction. We have got no time for that sort of thing. And of course, there was widespread corruption. So I think with respect, we do know what the nature of the challenge is. I think we owe it to victims of past abuses to deliver them justice, and we owe it to women and girls and kids growing up to make sure they don't become the future victims. So we want to get on with this. And I'd just say about Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips, these are people who, outside politics, actually banged up paedophiles, rapists, wife-beaters. If you talk to Keir and Jess about why they came into politics, it's because they know that politics has got a big role to play in putting this right.
But Maggie Oliver, the former Greater Manchester police officer who was the one who was instrumental in uncovering widespread abuse in Rochdale, says, and I quote, Sir Keir Starmer is as guilty as anyone over your failures to address the rape gangs when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. He was asleep at the wheel. Maggie Oliver was at the centre of this, and she's been highly critical of the Prime Minister. So you must admit he didn't do enough.
I actually genuinely don't think that's a fair criticism. As Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir opened up a number of historic cases where perpetrators thought they'd gotten away with it. He opened up historic cases to go after those people. He put in place specialist rape prosecutors to build the evidence base to make sure that convictions, which are notoriously hard to achieve in this area, actually came to pass. One of the reasons Keir Starmer came into government, into politics, is because he recognised that the courts can only do so much. The police and the courts need to be given the powers, the tools and the resources to do the job. And that's what, as Prime Minister, he's committed to deliver.
Is Labour resisting a public inquiry because it's worried about its Muslim vote?
Not at all. We, as I said, we've got an existing inquiry where recommendations haven't been implemented. We should crack on with that. There have been a number of other really powerful inquiries around Rotherham, for example, where there are recommendations where we need to see action. And as we've said to the community and the council in Oldham,
Rochdale rape gang leaders still living in Rochdale.
We would absolutely encourage them. We would absolutely encourage them to undertake their inquiry, and we'd support them to do that. The most important thing on this issue is that we get on with delivering justice for victims and actions taken to protect women and girls and children from any further abuse. And that is what the Prime Minister's focused on. Jess Phillips, as the Victims Minister, has spent her life and career supporting victims of violence against women and girls.
That's why you would have thought that a public inquiry would be
passionate about and committed to this.
It sounds like you would be wanting to commit to a public inquiry.
The problem with public inquiries is they take a hell of a lot of time. We've had an inquiry nationally. We've had a series of local inquiries.
You can't take too long to find justice for teenage girls who've been gang raped. Doesn't matter how long it takes. These victims have been horribly let down.
That's why we've got to get on with it.
They deserve justice. This could have been going back to the 1980s. It's carrying on now. You need answers, so you should have a public inquiry.
They do deserve justice. That is what the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and the Victims Minister are all focused on. We've had plenty of recommendations, many of which have not been enacted by our predecessors. We're going to get on with the job to deliver justice for victims and to protect people from becoming future victims.
Okay.
That is our focus. This is something the Prime Minister and the Victims Minister gave their professional lives to before entering politics, and that's why they're showing the level of drive and commitment now as Prime Minister, Home Secretary and Victims Minister that Keir, Yvette and Jess are all showing.
All right. Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed for braving the cold this morning. Great to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Still lots more to come on the show. I'm going to be speaking to the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, about the grooming scandal in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Hard to get a word.
OK, so I'm back, and I'm going to be speaking to Chris Philp in just a moment, asking him about the grooming scandal, but also has Camilla Tominey shot herself in the foot with her claim that Nigel Farage has been making up Reform's leadership numbers? I'm also going to be speaking to the deputy leader of that party, Richard Tice, in just a moment. But first, here's the news headlines with Sophia Hill.
Thank you, Camilla. Very good morning. It's just gone 10 o'clock. I'm Sophia Hill with your latest headlines in the GB newsroom. Our top story, heavy snow overnight is causing disruption across the country, with Manchester, Liverpool and Leeds Bradford airports all temporarily closing their runways until they are clear of snow. The Met Office has issued 2 amber weather warnings for England and Wales, forecasting 3 to 7 centimetres of snow, with rain in lower areas. One warning, covering much of Wales and the Midlands up to Manchester, is in effect until midday today. The second warning, covering most of northern England, including Leeds, Sheffield and the Lake District, is in place until midnight tonight. Rural communities have been warned that they could be cut off due to the weather, with some areas facing up to a foot of snowfall. The UK Health Security Agency has issued cold weather health alerts, which will remain in place for all of England ahead of a week of low temperatures. More NHS patients who need elective care will be able to decide where they are treated under new government plans to cut waiting lists. This falls under new upgrades coming to the NHS app, which Health Secretary Wes Streeting says will shift the NHS into the digital age. Experts have welcomed the move, but warn that digital innovations must not create new barriers and come at the expense of excluding those without a smartphone. Action will also be taken to tackle missed appointments, another costly problem facing the health service. GB News can reveal that Sir Keir Starmer ignored a Rotherham whistleblower's bullying complaint after she exposed child abuse and corruption while he was leader of the opposition in 2020.
We've seen correspondence sent by Sir Keir Starmer's office that simply says, unfortunately, we won't be able to facilitate a meeting. Oh, but here is an online form for processing complaints. But fundamentally, I think what we've seen as a political reaction to this story, with both Kemi Badenoch from the Conservatives and Rupert Lowe from Reform and plenty of other commentators as well, they're all saying that, well, Jane Senior did have that national hero status. She was being bullied. Why didn't you take the time to meet with her, especially considering the reputation and fear that people had around the Labour Party and the CSE scandal and all the cover-ups?
To claims saying all complaints are treated seriously and thoroughly assessed in line with our rules and procedures. Complaints are assessed via a specific process independent of the leader's office, and this was clearly signposted in response to correspondence at the time. And finally, Tomoko Ituka, the world's oldest person, has died at the remarkable age of 116 years old in Ashiya, Japan. According to Guinness World Records, the Japanese woman was the oldest living person, following the death of 117-year-old Maria Branius last year. City officials say she died on the 29th of December in a care home in central Japan. She was born on the 23rd of May 1908, and she loved bananas and yogurt-flavoured Japanese drinks. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Hill. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sophia. Lots more still to come on today's Camilla Tominey show. The Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, will be here. Does he know exactly what role Nigel Farage will play in tariff talks between the UK and the US? And Oliver Lawrence, the Managing Director of the Public Safety Foundation, will be here to offer his policing perspective on the child rape gang scandal. Plus, Scarlett Maguire and Bill Rammell will join me in the studio as we discuss what might lie ahead and what we will be looking for in what promises to be another sensational year of politics. But first, I'm joined by the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Lovely to see you this morning, Mr Philp. Thank you very much indeed for braving the cold to join me. The big question now that Kemi Badenoch has been asking for a full national inquiry into the grooming scandal is why on earth the Conservatives didn't demand one and hold one while they were in office.
Well, good morning, Camilla, and Happy New Year to you as well. Look, I mean, first of all, there was a significant national inquiry, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse that was commissioned and conducted by the last Conservative government. But that did not go far enough. It didn't cover all of the towns involved. It covered many other elements of child sexual abuse as well. And what is clear is that we do now need a full public inquiry to look at this comprehensively. That should include looking at all the towns involved. It should include looking at Keir Starmer's record as Director of Public Prosecutions. It should include looking at councils who appear mainly Labour or entirely Labour-controlled councils who appear to have deliberately covered this up. It includes what Simon Danczuk, the former Labour MP, said a day or two ago, that he was instructed by the then chair of the Labour Party to not talk about this issue, to cover it up, because they thought it would mean they got fewer votes from the Muslim community. A shameful act by the Labour Party chair at the time. So this is why we now need a full public inquiry to get to the truth. A public inquiry has the power to summon witnesses, give evidence under oath, requisition documents. Now, it can't take too long. It should be a focused and relatively rapid public inquiry, but the public deserve the truth. And most importantly, the victims, young, vulnerable girls
so are you saying
who were systemically gang raped over years. They deserve the truth and they deserve justice as well.
So can I just get clarification of a point you've just raised? Do you think that the Labour government is resisting this because it's afraid of losing Muslim votes?
I don't know why the Labour Party is refusing to have a proper national inquiry.
Do you think it's because it's worried about its Muslim electorate?
I don't know what their thinking is, but I do know that Labour councils, and it would now appear, based on Simon Danczuk's testimony, the national chair of the Labour Party as well, attempted to cover these issues up over many, many years. That is disgraceful. It is letting down the victims who are so appallingly treated, and it is now time for that inquiry. The truth must come out. The Labour Party, the Labour government cannot be scared of the truth. They have to essentially allow a proper inquiry to find out what really happened, and that will probably, I'm afraid, include looking at Labour councils, and it will include looking at the CPS as well as police forces.
OK, but you're dodging my question a bit.
Properly either.
You're dodging my question a bit. I mean, the Conservatives can't kind of hand it out without actually answering straight questions about what they're suggesting that might be motivating Labour here. We've got the suggestion that Labour might be motivated, particularly Jess Phillips, by the fact that she has got a huge proportion of Muslim voters in her constituency of Birmingham Yardley. We've also got the suggestion by Elon Musk, what do you make of this, that Keir Starmer is complicit, quotes, in the rape of children because he didn't do enough to stop it as Director of Public Prosecutions. So you may as well nail your colours to the mast. Do you agree, first of all, with the Muslim vote issue, and second of all, with the criticism, personally, of Keir Starmer?
Look, firstly, I don't know what is motivating the Labour Party. I can't speculate about that. All I know is they've made the wrong decision and they should immediately reverse it. If you want to know their motivation, you'll have to ask them. On your second question about Keir Starmer's role as Director of Public Prosecutions, again, we don't know exactly what cases were thrown in the bin when they should have been progressed, and that is why we need this public inquiry to get to the truth, to get to the bottom of what local authorities did, what the police did, and what the
you can
CPS,
take a position, surely,
did. Let me finish. Including, well, look, you asked me to sort of say whether Keir Starmer did or did not handle cases properly as DPP, and I haven't got the files in front of me. I haven't seen them. I simply don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is the public deserve to know, and the victims deserve to know, and the only way we will find out about the Labour councils we covered it up. The only way we're going to find out about what Keir Starmer, as Director of Public Prosecutions, did or did not do is if we have this public inquiry. And if the Labour Party don't agree to have this public inquiry, what I will say is this: it will certainly generate the appearance, the impression that they are continuing to cover up this scandal.
Do you know what the public thinks of this, Mr. Philp? The public, I think, thinks that teenage girls were gang raped and that the police and social workers and other organisations were complicit in covering it up, that at times the victims were treated as if they were the ones who were committing the crimes. We had a bizarre situation where two of the fathers of two of the victims tried to take on their abusers and they ended up being arrested. And that an environment was fostered while the Conservatives were in power, both in coalition and in government, that nobody could call out largely Pakistani men from carrying out these criminal and depraved acts because of a culture of political correctness. Now, unfortunately, the finger of blame does also point at the Tories because you fostered that environment and didn't call it out. How do organisations like the police and social workers operate in this manner if vicariously the government of the time doesn't take any responsibility for this culture that apparently community relations are more important than the safety of vulnerable teenage girls living in deprived communities in the north?
Right, a couple of points, Camilla. Firstly, just to be completely clear, the safety of these vulnerable young girls is far, far, far more important than cultural sensitivity or whatever absurd euphemism gets used. Protecting these girls should have been the priority, but it wasn't, and that was morally wrong. It was frankly despicable. Now, in terms of, you asked about the previous governments. Now, the government at national level actually did quite a lot. There was the Rotherham Review commissioned in 2014. There was the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse commissioned a couple of years after that reported about 2 years ago, which covered this. Sajid Javid, as Home Secretary, commissioned data into the ethnic backgrounds of the perpetrators, which helped build this evidence file that shows the vast majority of these rape gangs, organised rape gangs, were of Pakistani heritage, as you say. And it was Rishi Sunak, as Prime Minister, who set up the Grooming Gangs Task Force that led to 550 arrests of perpetrators and mandated the police to start collecting proper data on the ethnicity of the perpetrators. So that's what the last government did. Now, I think it wasn't enough and we need to go further with the full inquiry. Where these problems arose wasn't actually at national government level. It was local councils, almost entirely Labour-controlled. It was local police forces. It was potentially the Crown Prosecution Service. We need to find out what role Keir Starmer played in that. That is where the problem lay, and that is what this public inquiry must urgently get to the bottom of to try and stop this ever happening again.
A quick point, though. We've still got two of the main architects of the abuse in Rochdale still living in Rochdale 9 years on from being stripped of their British citizenship by Theresa May, which strikes me as extraordinary. These men are living among the victims they abused. Happy as Larry.
Yeah, that's disgraceful. They should, my view as Shadow Home Secretary is that where the perpetrators can be stripped of their British citizenship, they should be kicked out of the country immediately.
OK, let me move on to a political question now, Mr. Philp. Shouldn't Kemi Badenoch apologise for accusing Nigel Farage of making up Reform's membership figures? They're now at 173,000. It's been verified that they do have that many members by a number of newspapers, including my own, The Telegraph. So why is Kemi Badenoch accusing Nigel Farage of lying? She should apologise to the Reform UK leader, shouldn't she?
Well, look, Camilla, I haven't seen the evidence either way. I haven't seen the Reform evidence, nor have I seen the evidence that apparently came out before Christmas about the counter on the website. So I simply don't know. So I'm not going to wade into this,
she should apologise if she wasn't sure.
Have the facts. Well, I don't know, Camilla, I don't know what the facts were, so I'm not going to wade into this. What I do know is that people that vote Reform, who are Conservative-minded but vote Reform, end up creating a massive Labour landslide, unfortunately, as we saw last July. What I do know is a hard fact.
Not if they go into coalition with you.
Well, look, what I also know is there have been 175 council by-elections since the general election, and we have won 7 times more of those than Reform. What I know is that Reform only raised £70,000 in the third quarter of last year. I know that this £100 million donation they kept talking about before Christmas now appears to have disappeared. There's quite a lot of smoke and mirrors going on here. What I want to do is take the fight to Labour, expose them for their lies and their deceit, hold them to account, as I've been doing on your programme, Camilla, this morning. Take the fight to Labour, expose their lies, and I think it's essential that we kick them out at the next election.
All right, Chris Philp, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. I shall be putting all of that to Richard Tice, who's coming up next. Thank you very much. Well, there's been a busy weekend for Reform. They've had rallies across the country, so I'm going to be speaking to Richard Tice about that, the grooming gang scandal, and his own relationship with Elon Musk, who has made some interesting comments, not just about the grooming scandal, but also about Tommy Robinson. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Stick with me, we'll be back in just a jiffy.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
So, how did you get into radio initially?
It's the old thing. You do discos.
Yeah.
Back in the days when you used to put needles on.
What sort of year we're talking about?
Oh, it was black and white.
Okay.
That's as close as you're going to get.
Beatles, Rolling Stones?
Yeah. Sort of later than... Yeah, sort of a bit later than that, doing discos. But then you sort of do a tape. I did a tape for BBC Radio Manchester, the local BBC station. And just one off. Got a copy of that, edit. Yeah. Naively thought, everybody's going to send a tape to Piccadilly, which was the Manchester station, which was 73. And instead of that, a couple of years later, I sent a tape to Radio City in Liverpool, not thinking that everybody in Liverpool's going to be sending a tape there. And just a guy just went, I'm too good for this, doing the overnights, walked out, and my tape was on the top of the pile. And I got a phone call on a Thursday night, Thursday, the 12th of February, 76. Can you do 2 till 6 in the morning on Radio City in Liverpool? I thought it was one of my pals.
And what was you talking about on that radio show?
It was an overnight programme, so it's music.
Yeah.
In those days, you didn't have much needle time, but clever devil here noticed that the BBC stuff was not needle time. Yeah. So I used to put, like, the Goons on and the Hancocks. So you've got half an hour, and me and the security guy, Bert, on the door. We're the only two in the building. Yeah. I used to get in my car, put the Goons on, get in my car, dash down to the pier head, get a bacon butty, listening to it all the time, hoping that the record's not stuck, and then dashing back.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm joined now by the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Mr. Tice, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on the show once more. Now, can I ask you whether you agree with somebody who is suggesting he's going to donate quite a lot of money to Reform, Elon Musk, when he says that Keir Starmer is complicit in the rape of children in the grooming scandal? Is Keir Starmer complicit in the rape of children? Richard Tice.
What I think we need to establish is actually when Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions, what did come across his desk about these child rape gangs, this horrific grooming scandal? And what did he actually do about it? Because, we had the Jimmy Savile scandal, we've had the Mohammed Al-Fayed scandal under his watch, and now we've got these child rape gangs. What was he doing when he was Director of Public Prosecutions? Was he taking action, or was he, frankly, out to lunch? He's got serious questions to answer. I don't know what came across his desk, but he needs to clarify it, Camilla.
All right, but don't you think this needs some clarification? It's one thing to say that you've got questions to answer, and I think we can all agree with that. But to suggest that the Prime Minister is, quotes, complicit in the rape of children and that Jess Phillips should be in prison, this is somebody aligned with reform who wants to donate hundreds of millions of dollars / pounds. Is this the right language to be using?
And quite rightly, in a democracy, in a world of free speech, and Mr. Musk is promoting free speech, he and we are raising serious questions that require answers. And it seems to me the Labour Party is running scared. They won't have a national inquiry, and the Prime Minister won't answer serious questions about what he knew and when. You have to ask why. And I think the answer is, you inferred it earlier in your programme, because the Labour Party is running scared of the Muslim vote in certain northern towns. And there has been clearly a massive, massive cover-up over decades in dozens and dozens of towns, primarily in the north of England, because people have been running scared of the people involved in this grooming gangs, because it was ethnic minority men of Pakistani heritage, either born in the UK or who'd come to the United Kingdom.
OK, so you're willing to go further than the Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp then and suggest that you do think that Labour is resisting a public inquiry because it's worried about losing Muslim voters?
Well, just look at people like Jess Phillips' majority. I mean, she was almost ousted because of the nature of her constituents. And there are many others on the Labour front bench who are also very concerned about that vote, what I call the pro-Gaza vote.
That's quite the accusation, Mr. Tice, isn't it? You're basically saying that they are putting political expediency ahead of the safety of teenage girls.
I'm very happy to ask the question of people like Jess Phillips, why does she want not to have a public inquiry? It almost infers that they're continuing the cover-up that we all know has gone on. Tens of millions of British citizens are absolutely furious, and the refusal, firstly by the Tory party, no less, and now by the Labour Party, to have a full, open, transparent public inquiry, it stinks, it smells, and we want this to happen. It should happen.
Does it also stink that Elon Musk is declaring his support both for reform and Tommy Robinson?
Well, that's the whole point about free speech, is that someone like Elon Musk, who's promoting free speech around the world, he's very involved in UK business, and that's why he wants to get involved in UK politics. And, quite understandably, he's saying lots of questions need to be asked.
Yes. But are you asking yourself the question as to whether Tommy Robinson should be in jail or not?
I don't need to ask myself the question, because on your show previously, Camilla, I've made it very clear that we have nothing to do with Mr. Robinson. He is a convicted criminal in jail. We are a serious political party who is trying to reform the way this country is run so that it's run properly, managed properly, governed properly. And that's why we're hopefully going to win the next general election.
But then you got into a bit of deep water on social media about that, because there are a lot of people that are sympathetic with the reform cause. I'm not worried about social media. I'm worried about how we govern and run this country to make it grow again and make it great again. I'm not worried about a few heckles and a bit of abuse. But don't you agree with Tommy Robinson on quite a few things, Mr. Tice?
I've no idea. I'm not interested in Mr. Yaxley Lemon or Robinson or a convicted criminal. I'm interested in how we get this country growing again, how we stop these scandals, these abuses, how we properly run this country on behalf of the British people. And we need root and branch reform of so many different areas of public life. That's what we're exposing. And this scandal is, it's one of the most horrific in recent decades. It's up there with the infected blood scandal and the post office scandal. It is truly, truly appalling.
I agree with you on that. Can we move on to your colleague, Nigel Farage? Now, he's saying that he's quite willing to work with Labour and Peter Mandelson, of all people, to have an open dialogue with Donald Trump over in America. So Reform are happy to work with Labour, are they, despite being the chief critics of Labour, despite speaking about Starmageddons and such like? We've now got this strange alliance of Nigel Farage and Peter Mandelson.
Well, there's a thing called the national interest and the national strategic interest. And the United States is our most important strategic partner, both in defence terms and trade terms. And Nigel has the closest relationship with the president-elect and with senior figures in the incoming administration. And quite rightly, quite appropriately, he is putting party politics to one side and saying it's in the national interest that we help this economy grow. We help make people better off. And that means more trade with the United States where possible. And if we can help ensure that we promote better trading relationships, avoid tariffs with the United States when they're looking at imposing tariffs on the EU. Thank heavens we're not part of the EU, so we can avoid that nightmare straitjacket. Then that's the joy of the strength of the relationship that Nigel's got, and we should maximise it as a nation. And the Prime Minister should welcome his input.
All right, so let me just get this straight. You'll work with Peter Mandelson in the national interest, but you won't work with Kemi Badenoch, which would be in the national interest of anyone on the right, in order to keep Labour out of power in 2029. Square that circle for me, Mr. Tice.
Oh, it's very simple. It's horses for courses. Our trading relationship with the United States is in the strategic national interest. Being involved with a failed Conservative Party that's been responsible for damaging our economy and allowing mass uncontrolled immigration, and they have their questions to answer about this rape gang scandal. We will call them to account. And frankly, I think they're more sort of Lib Dem than actually real Conservatives. That's why you've got MPs now, former MPs, defecting to us, Camilla.
But let me just get this straight. So, well, you've got some former MPs. When are you going to get a big ex-cabinet minister? When's Suella Braverman going to be declared in turquoise colours? That's what we're waiting for, Mr. Tice, rather than the likes of Marco Longhi.
We mustn't rush these things. Patience is a virtue. Timing is everything.
But let me just get one thing straight then. So if, come 2029, Britain is facing the prospect of 4 more years of Keir Starmer, which has been declared to not be in the nation's interests, at least in one poll commissioned by the Mail on Sunday today, that Reform and the Tories won't do a deal, despite it perhaps being in the national interest, if the majority of the country would actually rather go right than left. You'll happily let Starmer in for another 4 years with Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves, will you?
Don't worry, Camilla. Reform have got all the energy, all the momentum. I'm convinced that by then we'll be polling the highest of all political parties. Frankly, it'll be time for the diminished Conservative parties to stand aside in the national interest so that we can make Britain great again. That's what we need.
Richard Tice, we've never doubted your levels of energy in the political fray. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to the Managing Director of the Public Safety Foundation, Oliver Lawrence, who'll be here to offer a policing perspective on the child rape gang scandal. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Don't go anywhere.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. A very unsettled day ahead. We've got heavy snow, also heavy rain, and some melting snow leading to the risk of some flooding in places. And we've got amber warnings in force across northern parts of the UK, from the Met Office, heavy snow up to 40 centimetres possible across the higher routes, leading to disruption, some power outages as well. We also have heavy rain moving into parts of Wales with melting snow here. Could lead to some localised flooding. To the south of this, bright and breezy, but temperatures on the mild side, 13, 14 Celsius. But for the vast majority, a cold, icy day to come. And icy stretches quickly reforming across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland as we move into the evening time. Further wintry showers moving in from the north across northern Scotland here. Could see some local icy stretches overnight into Monday morning as well. Wintry outbreaks across Northern Ireland and then heavy snow across northern England, southern Scotland, but rain to lower levels in places, and where we've had some snow, this continuing to melt, and then mild air pushing across the rest of England and Wales, but heavy rain as well moving its way eastwards as we head towards the early hours of Monday. Further snow across the north and the west into the early hours, so icy stretches reforming here and staying quite breezy, particularly in the east, with further showers moving in. Temperatures in the north falling below freezing once more, but still mild across some southern counties of England and Wales, 4 or 5 degrees to start the day. This weather system slowly pushes into the near continent. Still the risk of some sleet and snow as it does so, brightening up for many as colder air then sinks southwards for everyone, and a cold afternoon to come on Monday. Sunny spells, wintry showers most frequent across the north, feeling cold again, temperatures in single figures across all parts of the country. See you again soon.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm joined now by the Managing Director of the Public Safety Foundation, Oliver Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. When you sort of look back on the history of how these grooming gangs have been investigated, I mean, at so many different turns, you find that these teenage victims have been so horribly let down. I mean, can we go as far as to suggest that the police and some other public bodies have actually acted negligently here in relation to these victims?
Yeah, well, good morning, Camilla. Thanks for having me on. You know, over a quarter of a century, we've seen the most vile and abhorrent acts committed against young and vulnerable people across this country. And we've been told time and time again that multiculturalism is our friend. It's one of the biggest benefits of coming to the UK. And we've created cohesive communities. And that is important to recognise, that multiculturalism is a huge benefit to the UK. But we've gone from creating cohesive communities to complicit communities, with the police, the social services and the CPS watching over as communities have covered up, as local councils have covered up, the abhorrent crimes committed by certain sectors of the community against the most vulnerable of our society. And I'm ashamed to say that, yes, policing has failed, and we've seen it failed. It's apologised for its failures. And yet again, we're seeing time and time again more victims coming forward, this issue being suppressed time and time again.
Mr. Lawrence, you're a former police officer. What do you put it down to in terms of culturally how the police responded in some cases to these crimes? Clearly, there was a reluctance to talk about the nature of the abuse. I don't actually like the terminology of grooming gang. That doesn't really cover this. This is child rape on an industrialised scale. There was also reluctance to talk about the perpetrators, referring to the men as certain groups of men. They were predominantly Pakistani. I don't know why that couldn't be said and addressed at the time. Just talk to me about the culture within the police that makes officers particularly afraid or mindful of how they address these admittedly culturally sensitive issues.
Yeah, indeed. Listen, we know the facts. We know that victims of these matters were predominantly young, white, female girls in communities across this UK. And we know that a majority of offenders of these matters were Pakistani men, again, across this country. And policing has decided, for whatever reason, been very nervous, concerned about raising or identifying that particular issue and causing tension in communities with the fear of the fallout of that in terms of how would they manage and challenge those issues. Rather than tackling it head on, having strong, bold and courageous conversations with community leaders and those at local level and government level to say we have a problem, we need to address this head on, and policing it without fear or favour. Remembering there's Peelian principles that British policing base its very foundations on, policing without fear or favour, and following a rule-based, evidence-based rules. The rule of law is the most critical part of this, and notwithstanding the importance of the victims' rights here. Victims always get forgotten about. We speak time and time again about the offender this, the offender that. The offenders don't deserve any of these rights. It's the victims that we need to remember. And sometimes policing loses sight of that. It worries about the bigger picture. What would be the ramifications? How are we going to deal with this? It loses focus of the priority being the victim time and time again.
Mr. Oliver, I take it you are in support of the idea of a public inquiry.
Yeah, hugely in support of a public inquiry. It's quite, it's evident that this problem is far larger than anybody realised. A problem which has been going on for 25 years. If it wasn't for the likes of people like Maggie Oliver and her incredible work that she's done across this country, I don't know where we would be. My only concern is how many inquiries have we got to have before we hold actually anybody accountable for the failure society. I'm all for the inquiry. I'm all for spending the millions that we're going to do in lining lawyers' pockets and talking about these issues. We already really know what the issues are. We know government departments have failed, but who is going to be held accountable?
Well, this is the question that goes back to my original question about negligence, because one wonders how people can now be held accountable. There could be a civil case brought if people feel that, some of the victims feel that, for instance, the police have failed in their duty of care towards them. I can't envisage an environment where criminal charges can be brought against police officers or social workers or local councillors that were complicit. Can you?
Now, we have a modus operandi in this country of having inquiries and nothing happening off the back of them. Look at Grenfell and others. Nothing has happened with some of these inquiries. Nobody's really been held accountable for some of the acts that they've committed on society. I don't know an operational police officer that works in some of these units that deal with these matters that doesn't want to see these abhorrent figures in custody and in prison for long periods of time. There are some sensational detectives doing some incredible work out there. For me, it's the senior leaders, it's the government ministers, it's the people dictating policy and directing these investigations and suppressing them that I have a problem with, because I know there are tens of thousands of brave men and women in policing who want these people in prison, but something is preventing them from doing so. We've also got to look at the failure rates in the Crown Prosecution Service. Why is it that so many of these offenders who present before our court are not being convicted and are not facing lengthy prison terms? It really is something to be examined quite forensically.
Well, also, we're talking about people who have failed the victims being held to account. What about the actual abusers? We've got this perverse situation, Mr. Lawrence, where 3 of the 9 jailed sex abusers from Rochdale are using their citizenship loopholes to claim rights of family life, so that they can stop the challenge that is being made by the UK to deport them back to Pakistan. We've got a couple of actual ringleaders in Rochdale, 9 years on from being stripped of their British citizenship, still living in Rochdale. The public response to that will be, why can't the police just turn up there, put them in cuffs and lead them to the nearest airport to be flown back to Pakistan?
Camilla, our criminal justice system is bursting at seams. You look at 70,000 cases backlogged in the courts. Our prison system is absolutely chockers. We have 10,000 foreign offenders sitting within our prison. When I sat as one of the senior heads of Border Force in Australia, when we had people that had emigrated to Australia and had committed serious and violent crimes, we made sure we moved those people back to their countries of origin because they pose a significant risk to the safety and security of the citizens of Australia. We did it effectively. We weren't in the ECHR and we're a very lawful country. Here in the UK, we really struggle with the concept of maintaining the safety and security of our citizens because we prioritise others over victims. And it's about time we started to have a hard look at ourselves and making the big, bold policy decisions to make sure that we can ultimately fundamentally, number one priority of government, protect its people. And we're not doing that. And by doing that, victims are walking the streets with the offenders who could turn up at any moment walking past them, knowing that they've been in prison or they haven't even gone to jail because they've got a suspended sentence. They don't feel empowered, they feel weakened, and they feel fearful.
Really brief answer needed to the following question, because we're running out of time, Mr. Lawrence. Are the police going to learn from this? Do you think that habit of keeping a lid on claims that are made against Pakistani men is going to change now after this?
Very quickly, Operation Stove, with the NCA's largest investigation into this matter, identified over 1,000 survivors. It arrested over 208 people, 20 convictions, and 250 years in a totality of sentencing. Victims are now starting to regain the confidence in coming forward to police to report these matters. That is a positive. It was some outstanding work by the NCA, and let's hope that continues going forward.
Oliver Lawrence, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Well, don't go anywhere, because coming up next, we're going to be looking at what might be happening in 2025 on the political front. So we've got local elections that are going to prove crucial for both Reform and the Conservatives, let alone Labour. And I'm going to be discussing all that with the former Labour MP Bill Rammell and the pollster Scarlett Maguire in just a minute. So if you want to know what to look out for in 2025, don't go anywhere.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello there. It continues to remain unsettled across western parts of the Mediterranean, but fairly warm for the time of year, drier further east. Dry for Madeira though, temperatures 18 Celsius on Monday, but you can see unsettled weather across Portugal, Spain, southern France into Italy. Temperatures on the cool side, but drier towards Greece and Cyprus and Turkey as well. But temperatures here nearer to average for the time of year, but some pleasant sunny spells. Staying warm in Madeira for the next few days as well.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Recruiters are warning that if you're not tech savvy, you could be missing out with your CV failing to make it through an AI-powered sifting process. So we've gone from sort of computer says no HR people ticking boxes to AI, right? Is that right?
Yes, well, this applies once you're in the job as well, as a recent report revealed that employees expect AI will manage an average of a third of their tasks within the next 12 months. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Cosmo Curry, founder of Van Kuysen, a leading company in technology recruitment.
Morning, Cosmo.
Morning.
Good
Hi,
morning.
Ben.
Well,
Hi.
yeah,
Pleasure.
thank you for joining us. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because AI is, of course, on the rise, and now in the workplace and in universities and things. Another article came to mind. There was a student recently, I think it was in the news just the other day, that got in trouble for using AI. So there's, you know, for exam purposes and essays. So there's lots of different ways that it can be a good thing and a bad thing. But you're, of course, here to talk about the ways in which AI is a good thing within the workplace.
Absolutely. I mean, AI is here to stay, for sure. And we're seeing this rise of people using it in such a clever format. And the other side of it is also we're seeing people who are using it and during the process of that, they are losing their character. We're losing the actual insight into the individual behind that. And so we've kind of got this kind of mix. And I think AI is phenomenal when you're looking at it from a point of view of optimization, point of view of speed, getting results. But I think we have to remember that, you know, the fundamental of recruitment is people. And we cannot substitute the people, the personal aspect, by replacing that with AI.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. So we're only 5 years into 2025, but we thought we would take this opportunity to take a look at what we need to look out for in the next 12 months with pollster Scarlett Maguire and former Labour Minister Bill Rummel. Thank you for being here, both of you. First of all, should we address... I'm sorry, it is a rival poll company. It's Delta Poll, and you represent JL Partners. I should state that now. But it's a poll basically summarised in the headline on the front of the Mail on Sunday. Starmer will be out of number 10 in a year. Your reaction to that, Scarlett?
I think it's interesting because when you actually look at the copy, it says a third of voters think that Starmer will be out in a year. It doesn't say how many people don't think, but I would guess from that means a plurality. So more people think he will stay than go. It's unclear because we don't have the tables for it. So I think it's a bit of a strange headline to put with that poll. However, there's also plenty of other interesting information in that poll, which just points to, I think, how much trouble Keir Starmer is in with public opinion, quite aside from that headline. So how badly people think he is doing as Prime Minister, his favourability ratings, all of this point to, I think, quite a sticky situation for the Prime Minister as he begins 2025.
Bill, I know you're going to be quite understandably partisan towards the Labour cause, but even you have to admit, Keir Starmer's had a shocker.
It's not been the best start in terms of the first 6 months in government. However, the poll is interesting, and what it underlines is the degree to which the split on the right is benefiting the Labour Party in the way that the split on the centre-left in the 1980s benefited the Tory Party. Even within that poll, it gives Labour a 7% lead.
Yes, voting intention, Labour 30, Conservatives 23, Reform 22, Lib Dems 12. I tell you what, Reform will be happy with 22.
But absolutely my point, the split on the right. And look, Labour needs to start delivering. It needs to much better communicate what it's doing. But Labour only needs to get back up to 34, 35%. And
for another loveless landslide.
Absolutely. Well, I said 6 months before the election this is going to be the first government elected by a landslide with absolutely no enthusiasm. I think that's part of the challenge we're facing.
Do we want governments of non-enthusiasm, Scarlett?
I mean, I don't think it's a great aspiration for people to be shooting for sort of a parliamentary majority, even if people, they know that the country isn't very happy with the direction of how politics generally is travelling. But I think I'd slightly caveat that. Yes, I think I'm absolutely right that Labour is benefiting from the fact that the Conservative Party certainly has been a bit of a vacuum and has been since the general election. We're not seeing Kemi Badenoch make any difference in the polls since she took over, and they were coming back from a historic low. However, if I were Labour, I wouldn't be rejoicing, I think, about the rise of Reform UK. I would be worried about it as well. And I say that because if you look at the averages of polls this time this year compared to this time last year you had Labour on 43%, you had the Conservatives on 25%, and you had Reform UK all the way down on 10%. If you look at the averages of the polls now, you have Labour down 26%, so down on 26%, not going down by 26%. Conservatives exactly the same at 25%, and you have Reform UK just on both of their heels at 23%. And it's that rise of Reform UK and everything going in the right direction to them which would worry me.
How about this, Bill?
But Scarlett, you're the pollster. Clearly, a year ago, the polls were inflating Labour's position because, yes, we were on 43, 44% of the vote and we got 34% of the general election. But undoubtedly, I am not complacent and I'm not rejoicing at this. Labour needs to start delivering. The NHS, which the Prime Minister and Wes Streeting are talking about tomorrow, cutting waiting lists, getting the economy moving and cutting net migration. Once we begin to do that, I think the position will begin to move.
Yeah, I think Labour, I think there was a sense Labour's poll lead was being inflated. We can see that they only got 34% of the vote. That polling average was pointing to 43%. But even if you take that 34% down to an average of now 26%, that is, going down by 7%. I mean, they've got a lot of time to turn it around, as you say. They've got another 4.5 years before there's a general election. However, I think it's the trend lines going in the wrong direction for the two main parties and in the right direction for Reform UK, which I just think would be worrying.
Yeah, I mean, Reform must be happy that Labour have hemorrhaged a lot lot of its support to them, because I think they feel they've probably maxed out on Conservatives. If you were going to be a Conservative voting for reform, you'd have definitely done it last time round. Maybe there are some more to go. We've seen the defection of Marco Longhi and others. But he's going to massively attack the Labour vote in the Red Wall, isn't he?
But I think there's a ceiling of about 25% for reform. And what people don't focus on is that for every one voter that Nigel Farage attracts, he repels two others. He's a very divisive figure.
I definitely think that certainly used to be the case. I would get uneasy about labelling exactly what Reform UK ceiling is. I'm sure it exists, but I'm not so sure at the moment it is 25%. We'll get a better sense over the last few months. And the reason why I say that is because Nigel Farage's popularity ratings have actually, again, been the only ones out of the main politicians that have been moving in the right direction. So we had him going up by a net 10 positivity points, still underwater, but he also had the most people having a favourable view of him compared to anyone else. And that's for the first time. And that's while Keir Starmer is bottoming out the table. However, yes, I think Reform UK will be looking to attack Labour voters. They came second in 89 Labour-held seats, so they definitely want to be going after those seats. At the moment, Labour are losing slightly more voters to Reform UK than the other parties, although it's incredibly close and some pollsters have it slightly differently. But they're still losing more voters.
Let's hang on, Bill. Let's just look at that, because we're running out of time, as is ever the case when we have great chats like this. Let's look at the main milestones of 2025. The local elections, first of all. So Farage has said, you know, we want to be winning hundreds of seats. How many seats does Reform need to win to look like a credible force to be reckoned with come 2029?
I think they've put the bar very high for themselves, and if they don't win hundreds of seats, I think they could lose their momentum.
But what does hundreds mean? 200, 400, 600?
I'd say, well, it's a hard number to put on, but I'd say they'd want to be looking in a performance of 400 or 500 council seats.
If they do win that many seats, and it's the first year of a Labour government, so you can't do that thing of going, oh, well, it's an incumbent and nobody wants to vote for them. If Labour hemorrhage seats in May, Starmer's on a really sticky wicket, isn't he?
I'll tell you this, Camilla, there's absolutely no talk within the Labour Party about Keir Starmer being replaced.
Really? There was talk at the Spectator Parliamentarian of the Year Awards by Wes Streeting himself joking about Angela Rayner and his own leadership ambitions. Of course there is talk within Labour circles about whether this man can go...
I get absolutely no sense that there is any degree of enthusiasm for changing Prime Minister. We need to start delivering. But in terms of the local elections...
There's no enthusiasm for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, but hold on. In terms of the local elections, this feels a bit to me like 2014, where in my own constituency, UKIP as then was, the Labour Party and the Tories were virtually level pegging. Now, that was an awful result for us, but it didn't lead to a massive surge at the general election.
If it's a terrible local elections, let's be honest, it's going to put him in a quite dicey position with hugely ambitious politicians like Wes Streeting, who we had on earlier, bringing up the rear, saying things that are more popular with the electorate, like, oh, why don't you choose where you have your hip operation?
Well, look, you can never say never. I don't think that's likely to happen. I actually think a bigger risk for the Labour Party, and I've being absolutely frank here, I really worry about the rumours I'm hearing about, because of local government reorganisation, local elections in certain areas being postponed or cancelled.
Yes.
I think that
like
would look really
democracy.
Undemocratic.
Yes.
And you know, I hope and I would urge the party not to go down that route.
And what's the other key signpost of this year? Is it the next budget, whenever that might be, spring, autumn?
I think it's quite hard to say. I think the locals will be deciding both for Keir Starmer, for all three party leaders, actually. I think otherwise it will be things we're not even expecting yet, as has been in the previous few years. But the budget, no, that's a huge milestone, especially as this budget, it didn't seem to go down that badly on the day, but I think we're still feeling the ramifications across a variety of sectors. And we can see that now, for the first time in a very long time, the Conservatives have slightly regained on who would be the better party to handle the economy.
We've only got
that is quite a bad sign.
Seconds,
well, I think
the
other big issue is Trump and just how challenging he is in terms of tariffs, in terms of his impact on international affairs. That could be, for any government, enormously destabilising.
You know Mandelson, will they get on?
Oh, Peter's a really smart operator.
No, but will he get on with Donald Trump? I think he's been hugely critical of him, hasn't he?
Yeah, but I mean, look, you know, J.D. Vance has been incredibly critical of Donald Trump, and he works with him. Peter will get into grips with the Trump administration.
All right. Bill Rammell, thank you very much. Scarlett Maguire, thank you very much too. Lots to look forward to in 2025. Stick with GB News. We'll be following developments every step of the way. I'm going to be back next week at 9:30. But up next, you know who it is. It's Michael Portillo here on GB News. Don't go anywhere. He's up at 11. Have a lovely rest of your Sunday.
see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. It remains unsettled through the rest of Sunday and much of next week as well, staying on the cold side, the risk of overnight frosts, the snow and ice in places too. Low pressure still pushing north and eastwards across the country. An amber warning for snow across northern parts of England through the rest of Sunday. Some disruption continuing here. We've seen 20 centimetres of snow in places. This will continue to build through the rest of the day, locally up to 40 centimetres for a few by the end of the day. Heavy rain also pushing in across western parts of the UK. Met obvious warnings in force here. Temperatures barely above freezing across the northern half of the UK. Icy stretches possible. Exceptionally mild in the south. Temperatures around 14 Celsius. Heavy rain continues to push north and eastwards across England and Wales this evening, but an icy evening to come across much of Scotland as temperatures